And we will be live in right now. Hello, hello. It is good to see you on this Wednesday evening, May 27th, 2020. It is Wednesday night, 7 p.m. on the East Coast, 4 p.m. on the West Coast. I like introing like DJ style, Anyway, as always, we like to give a couple minutes for people to get in and get settled. Lisa will be DJing today. So definitely, she got her DJ headphone. Yeah. So definitely say hi. Let us know you're here and where you're from. And because we like to say hi back. And come in, get comfortable, and we'll get started very, very shortly. And there's Katie. And first, hi, Katie.
Hey.
I can literally hear club music somewhere. Is that me?
Oh, I hear that. I hear a little
Where
bit
is
of
that?
thing. I don't know. Did Nate turn it on? What's up? If you're just joining us, please say hello. Let us know you're here and where you're tuning in from. It's Cassie from San Francisco, an awesome advocate who we love and adore. It's Kristen from Port Lee. Hi, Ivy. I hope you're feeling better. Just under 30 seconds before we get. Oh, it's Mr. Neural Network.
Oh, Jason.
Himself,
Jason, no questions about neural networks. Banned.
Yeah.
Banned.
Jason, you're banned from
All of
questions, my friend. Peter Phillip from Milwaukee. Hi, Peter. Rebecca from Pennsylvania. At first, I thought that said Transylvania, which would have been cool too. We have Natalie from Texas. Our friend Katie. Our friend Katie from Austin, Peru. Hello. Jason Spielman said hello. Stockton, California. Hi, Caitlin. We'll give it just 10 more seconds, and then we'll get rolling. Always reward the people that show up first. Pacifica.
Cool.
Hello from Tatiana
Ukraine.
from Ukraine.
That's so cool. Hi, Tatiana.
Hello, Tatiana.
Awesome.
Hello.
From Ottawa, Canada. We have a full international audience tonight. I'm super excited.
Super cool.
California.
Yeah,
for sure. Palo Alto.
It's almost like one of us was from California, or maybe two of us, but one lives in Georgia now. I don't know. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Sean Shinnick, one of our favorite friends. Draw Your Monster on Instagram. Check it out. Super talented, great guy. He's also literally a foot taller than me, which is frustrating.
Oh my God, which makes him 2 feet taller than me.
Yeah, exactly. So love us from Sean Shinnick in the house. Let's get started. We could sit here all day talking. Welcome to ACT Acceptance Commitment Therapy Town Hall Volume 2. That means this is the sequel. My name is Ethan. I'm the National Ambassador for the International OCD Foundation, which simply means I have OCD and like to talk a lot about it. Hi, Jelly Bean. Good to see you. So let's quickly go over some housekeeping. This town hall is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in crisis or if you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. But we hope that everybody is feeling okay tonight. That is for sure. As always, we want to ask you to be respectful and kind to others. We are all here to support one another and advocate for each other. I always like to remind you that we try to create as safe a space as possible, but this is a public forum. It is being recorded. It will live on the interwebs for infinite amount of time. And so, as always, keep that in mind when asking questions, but we do our best to definitely create as supportive and safe a space as possible. With that, I'm super excited to announce our panel. We've got some awesome guests and some dear friends of mine and all of the above. So, and also, if you're just tuning in, welcome, ACT Town Hall Volume 2. If you were with us last week, we will definitely devote more time to, I'm really emphatic with my hands today. I'm like drumming, but talking and not, anyway. if you were with us last week and didn't get your question answered, go ahead and pop that question into the comment thread. We definitely want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible today. So don't hesitate to ask questions, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. So first, I would like to introduce, of course, ladies before Nate. Just below me, I would like to introduce Dr. Marisa Mazza. She's a clinical psychologist and founder of Choice Therapy Psychological Services, Inc., an individual therapy practice. She offers evidence-based therapy to teens and adults struggling with OCD and other anxiety-related problems. Dr. Mazza is the president of the Bay Area Association of Contextual Psychology and faculty at the University of San Francisco. She has recently published the ACT Workbook for OCD. Thank you, Marisa, for being here.
Thank you, Ethan. I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. Also, her kitchen is white. Okay, interesting facts. Next to her, diagonal. Everything is always. I'm still not used to this. I still can't. Oh, there it is. Okay, diagonal is a dear friend of ours, and we always love to have her. Dr. Lisa Coyne. She is the founder and senior clinical consultant of the McLean OCD Institute for Children and Adolescents at McLean Hospital, and is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. She is the founder and director of the New England Center for OCD and Anxiety, and is on the faculty of the Behavioral Therapy Training Institute of the International OCD Foundation. She's also a licensed psychologist and peer-reviewed ACT trainer. She's authored multiple articles and chapters on ACT with children and adolescents, and is a co-author of the book Acceptance Commitment Therapy, The Clinician's Guide for Supporting Parents, and The Joy of Parenting.
Which is not published yet, by the way, just
FYI. Wait, you said keep the
That's
parents.
Okay. Just dog ear it.
No, you said keep the parents one. Those that had parents in it.
Oh, right. Well, we're working on it. Our Kitty, if you're listening, we'll send it. We'll send you the draft.
Well, that means I deleted the book that is apparently out, which Lisa can add. But her new book, Stuff That's Out, a Teen's Guide to Unspiraling When OCD Gets Noisy, just released this month. We did a book launch party. It's really awesome. And then her other book that I didn't name because it doesn't have the word family in it.
Which one? Oh, the parenting one? Oh, don't worry about it.
Also due in 2020. Okay, anyway, she wrote some books. We love Lisa.
Yeah. That's all you need to know. It's fine.
Last but certainly not least, we have a great guy, a good friend of mine who I've known for many years, Nate Gruner. Nate received his MSW from Boston College Graduate School of Social Work. He completed his postgraduate fellowship at McLean Hospital's OCD Institute and is currently working there as a staff behavioral therapist. Nate has particular interest in increasing the effectiveness of psychological treatments for OCD and related disorders. He received the McLean Hospital Career Development Fellowship grant to fund research study examining acceptance and commitment therapy, enhanced exposure therapy for OCD. In addition to his research and clinical work, Nate serves as a founding member of the board of directors for the New England chapter of the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science. Mm-hmm. Nate!
Thanks, Ethan.
Good to see you. And it's not in his bio, but probably one of his greatest successes is being my therapist at my darkest time. I don't know why, in fact, that's not in your bio, Nate. I'm slightly offended. But Nate, so we'll dive into that a little bit more. But Nate, it's great to have you. We love you dearly. So let's go ahead and get rolling. We got lots of people here, but before quickly, just if we have some new folks, Nate, why don't you quickly just give us a quick definition of ACT and what it is and how perhaps how it's used in conjunction with exposure response prevention therapy.
All right. Well, I'll start, and then the others can jump in. ACT is all about increasing what we call psychological flexibility, which is the ability to be in the present moment, see your thoughts as thoughts, follow the ones that are helpful, leave the ones that aren't helpful alone, be open to your emotions, notice what's important to you and take action on that in your life in a flexible way. And we'll get into this a lot today, I'm sure, but exposure therapy is really all about those processes that I just talked about. And I think a lot of the work that Lisa and Marisa and I do is about teaching people how to approach what they're afraid of using those psychological flexibility skills.
Yeah.
Excellent. Marisa, do you want to add to that?
I mean, I think Nate said it beautifully. I mean, the simplest way I think of ACT is it's a willingness to just experience no matter what's showing up in the service of really doing what matters to you. So whether it's, obsessions, urges, any other kind of negative Nancy thoughts, am I willing to take this along with me while doing what matters?
I love that. And Lisa, we know that values are a part of ERP, but how does it integrate well into ERP as an adjunctive treatment?
So I don't think of it as an adjunctive treatment. I noticed that last week folks talked about it like that, but it is an exposure-based treatment because it's all about learning how to feel stuff and still choose what you want to do with your life flexibly, right? So the ingredients of exposure are willingness to experience something that's hard. And the values piece comes in as in the sense that we really focus on helping people. If we're doing an ACT-based ERP or however you want to talk about it, it's about helping people choose to build their lives in ways and choose to take steps towards that, even if really uncomfortable stuff shows up. The trick is when that stuff shows up, not doing anything with it, not kind of trying to avoid it or suppress it, but just simply allowing it to be there. That doesn't mean it's going to feel better. It does mean that, when you increase your willingness to have that stuff, you become more and more and more flexible, and OCD tends to kind of pack up and head off to the sunset, which is kind of really nice. So I don't see it as an adjunct, although I guess, you could get technical and you can do, if you're talking about traditionally done ERP, where you're using hierarchy, you're measuring OCD, we do all of that as well, I would guess, right? I mean, maybe you guys do it differently than I do because I think that it's a flexible model. But the values piece is a very helpful, I think, motivational piece because it reminds me when you struggle with anything at all, whether it's anxiety or OCD, the world gets really tiny and you focus on just that and your idea of who you are can become, just so tied up in that. So it's really helpful at helping people remember there's a whole world out there for you and you can be effective and you can build a life that you love in it, right? And that's important. And the other important piece, maybe Nate or Marisa could talk about this, is kind of undermining rituals, undermining any sort of control strategies that people engage in.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Marisa.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really drew me to ACT as I was traditionally trained in ERP, and one of the things that I really, really like about ACT is the implementation of the values work. And I actually spend quite a bit of time doing that work before I even start exposures. In terms of the control piece, I think setting the agenda for the therapy is really helpful initially as well. And so one of the things that I'll often do with clients is really take a look at what are the strategies that have been happening and how long have they been happening for, and are they working for you? And when I say working for you, I mean, do they serve you in the long run? Are they helping you get closer to your values ultimately and what is really, really important to you? And if not, then perhaps we can try something new, right? Perhaps we can try something new and try different strategies in terms of how we're relating to those thoughts and feelings, with the hopes that these new strategies can get you closer, practicing being more flexible and getting you closer to the life that you want.
I love that. Nate, anything to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, I also was trained in traditional ERP, and when I learned to ACT, and I would say probably when I was working with you, Ethan, 10 years ago, I wasn't even as clear about this as I am now. I see it. Yeah, I see exposure as a way to practice being who we want to be.
8:30.
To practice being who you really want to be in the face of the things that scare you. And so it's not so much a treatment that's about getting somewhere in your life. It's more about being who you want to be in the moment that you're afraid, and very present focused and process oriented in that way. And so I think that values really is a huge part of what makes exposure therapy effective.
Nate, I just want to say, I want to bottle what you just said. It was brilliant. Being who you want to be in the moment that you are afraid. That was gorgeous. And that just is a beautiful summary. Nice.
So if you're just joining us, as always, we like to, I'm not going to fall for this. I see there's like, oh, there's a few questions. And then I ask everybody questions. And by the time we finish, there's 1,000 questions and I've screwed up royally, which I'm going to embrace screwing up. So go ahead and put your questions into the comment thread if you've got them. We're definitely going to jump on questions very, very shortly. So I know there's a lot of people in the room, so we definitely want to give you an opportunity to ask what is on your mind. I will say that ACT is a very personal therapy for me. It was game-changing in my own life and my own experience with OCD. And so when I act excited in this room, I always like to remain transparent in my advocacy because I think that, I hope that it's relatable in some way. But I really want to kind of tap into my own experiences with using ACT and kind of use that as a teeing off point, maybe to have some discussions before we jump into questions. And I would love Marisa's and Lisa's input, obviously, as well in this. But I would just like to start by saying, and this is really fun for me because I don't know that I presented with Nate ever, so this is very exciting for me. So just to give, not to make it about me, I'm just randomly, but just to give some basic setup and clarity. When I first met Nate, I had just been kicked out of the OCD Institute for faking an accident. If you know my story, I pretended to dive into a snowbank and have a head injury and to get shipped to a hospital where I could get a CAT scan to make sure that my brain was okay. So I faked all that. And so they had just removed me from the OCDI and came up with this extravagant plan to sort of live on the streets of Boston and figure things out. And I don't want to go more into the story, but basically I was at rock bottom. I was close to, I was pretty much close to death as I had been in bed for 6-7 days, realized nobody was coming for me. Nobody was helping me. I had to sort of take charge and take the reins myself. And I had Nate in my address. I mean, he was in my contact information as my go-to person if I needed it. But, I didn't know to reach out. I was too scared and too afraid and too caught up in the OCD. And as I say in my speech, suddenly the fear of what may happen because of the OCD paled in comparison to my current reality, which was I was going to die because I wasn't eating and drinking and taking my meds and all the scary stuff. So I was like, oh crap. Okay, well, I have a chance of if I could walk through the fire, I have a chance of living as opposed to this. So enter Nate. In this moment, I learned all the ERP I could possibly learn. They actually decided no longer do ERP treatment with me because there was nothing else for me to learn. I just needed to choose to shift, which I was unable to do. But they said, we'd like to try some acceptance commitment therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy with you. And so I finally took a bus, and it was snow. It was crazy. And I took a bus to meet Nate. And over the next 6 months, Nate and I worked very closely, I think 3 days a week together. He saw me crying and freaking out multiple times. I'm just curious, Nate. Like when I showed up at your door for the first time, and I was really, really sick, even after 10.5 months of pretty much intensive treatment. What was your approach? What did you see, and how did you feel like you were going to apply ACT to my current situation?
I looked back at the notes from 10 years ago to sort of prep for this, and what I realized is something that Lisa said earlier, which is it seemed like what you were afraid of was hitting your head and getting a brain injury. That's what Jason and the OCDI were treating you for. And so we were all doing exposure therapy for that. We were having you hit yourself on your head to trigger that fear that you would hurt yourself. And like you said, it wasn't getting anywhere. So when I met you, I started to realize that what you were actually afraid of, and I guess I couldn't articulate it as well until now, is being on your own, away from your parents, having to face life by yourself and figure out who you are in the world. And it wasn't really so much about hurting your head, but it was more about how to live your life independently and face your feelings on your own. And so Jason and I did something pretty radical, which was to put you in a sketchy apartment in Boston and away from your parents with, no one there to rescue you, but only to be able to call me for skills coaching. And one of the things that I found, and I think this is really important for people to know, is I don't think you were that interested in learning ACT until you really hit rock bottom. So one of the reasons we came to the Institute is because you hadn't really faced a time in your life where you needed the skills, and you could go back to your old avoidance behaviors. And so without the avoidance behaviors and the parents to lean on, you suddenly needed the skills.
Lisa, Marisa, anything to add in terms of seeing similar cases like that, or in your own experiences?
Yeah, I mean, lots, you know, with some people, so ACT and ERP are similar. They're both exposure-based treatments, but I guess I want to back up and just say, yes, I've seen many cases like that, Ethan. And ACT helped me in my own life with my own sort of panic giving talks. And that was an amazing thing. So maybe the best way to like describe this would be to just give an example, right? So I used to actually avoid giving talks at all, ever. And I still have social anxiety about it. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. Only I always choose if it's important to me to give talks, right? Even if anxiety comes along for the ride. And I used to muscle my way through trying to give talks and trying really hard not to panic the whole time. And what would happen would be I would lose my train of thought. I wouldn't understand. I wouldn't, like, at the moment I would see data that I would have to describe, I'd be like, you know, like seizure, you know, panic through the roof. And one day after learning some of this stuff, what happened was I walked out into like a really enormous thing, and I wanted to present some data that we had in our lab, actually on I think it was on OCD. And I started to panic. And I just paused and I thought, do you want to make this talk about you managing anxiety, or do you want to actually try and give this talk really well? And I chose. And then the next thought was, what would a competent speaker do right now? Do that. And I was like, well, they would like look at the audience. And I was like, oh, look at the audience, right? So I did. And it was really amazing because after some time of doing that, ACT, the bottom line is ACT and exposure are not about making anxiety go away. And they're not about learning to tolerate anxiety. They're about empowering you to learn things that help move you, even if you're like at rock bottom like you were, Ethan, into a life that you love. Because no matter how anxious you are, no matter how bad it gets, you always have that ability to choose, right? To step forward. And not about controlling the outcome either, but choosing in this moment a small step that brings you towards a life that matters to you. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there you go.
No, I loved it. Go ahead, Marisa.
I mean, I think to piggyback off of what Nate and Lisa are also talking about here is like, the way that the mind is designed is it's not naturally meant to be our cheerleader. Like, it's not naturally meant to say, oh, you got this, girl, right? Like, it's not going to do that in most cases, at least. And so what I would say is, like, oftentimes the thoughts that my mind has given me and the thoughts that I give a lot of the folks that I work with is you're not capable, right? You're not capable of living on your own. You're not capable of having this feeling. You're not capable of not knowing. And what I say to that is, let's see. Like, we don't actually know unless we try. And the thing that I love about ACT is it teaches us how to have the anxiety, how to have that thought and doubt, and try it out and see. Be curious. Let's actually check it out for ourselves.
Love that.
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to get to questions are piling up. We got a full room. I'm super excited. The last thing I'll say is, for sure, I think for me, the takeaway from ACT was coexist. I think that was the word for me that really suddenly I learned that I could feel terrible and still do things that were important to me, and even still have a good day, even though I was feeling terrible. And suddenly feelings didn't define who I was or what I did or how I did it. In fact, I could do really great things and still feel like crap. So there were some things, and also, and I always like to say, like, ACT opened a window that allowed ERP to get in there and me to utilize it. So I don't want to give the perspective, because we're not telling the whole story. I don't want to ever give the perspective that I completely abandoned ERP, did ACT, and saved my life. It was the conjunction of the two therapies, and ACT really, really got in there and squeezed open a little portal that I can then insert, all kinds of things that I'd been learning and really get to grow exponentially. And so, and also don't, if you're watching, no, you don't necessarily need to be kicked out on the street. If you want to learn more about my story, you can email me. There's a lot more to it. It was a very strategic, educated decision made by lots of people. It wasn't just to like, oh, get rid of him. So just throwing that out there, because I get that question all the time. The last thing I'll add is like, I'd be curious, there are multiple lessons that resonate in my head from my days with Nate. There are a few of them. One of them, and I don't know how you demonstrate it like by yourself, but one of them was the visual showing of diffusion. We have a diffusion question, but it was the first time, Nate, you held up a book in my face and was like, this is your thought. What can you see? And then, and we did this whole slide. So that was really game changing for me. I don't know how, I wish there was a way to show it to people, because it really changed on my perspective on how I interacted with my thoughts.
When we get to that question, we can do it. Or do you want to do one now?
Yeah, I would love to do it. You guys, this seriously, I'll never forget this moment when I sat on Nate's couch in his he had the crappy office at the time because he was the young guy. He wasn't even in the main building. And he did this to me, and I was like completely blown away. I'd never seen my thoughts. Yes, please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to start by saying that whatever works to help people see their thoughts more at a distance is diffusion. So it's not like there's one technique to do it. And I think one that I can just do with you right now, Ethan, it'll probably take like a minute, is I'll give you an instruction. This is something I do at the OCD all the time in groups. So I'm just going to give you an instruction. I want you to follow it. Can you raise your right hand? Okay, lower it. Okay. Now I just want you to do the opposite. So I'm going to tell you to do something. I want you to do the opposite. Can you lower your right hand?
No.
Lower your right hand.
No, lower what?
You're doing the opposite. So lower your right hand.
Oh.
Okay. Raise your right hand. Okay. Now, the third way I want to do this is I'm going to give you instructions, and you get to do whatever you want. Okay?
Okay.
Ready? So I want you to raise your right hand. Lower it. Talk to Lisa. Talk to Lisa. Talk to Marisa.
Oh, hi, Nate.
Ask for a chat question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me pause for a second. Did you get the instructions? I was going to talk to you, and you get to do what?
Whatever I wanted.
Yeah, but do you notice how hard it is? Is I'm talking to you, and I'm saying things, and you know what they mean, so it's hard not to engage with me. But really, the exercise is learning how to engage with me when you want to, and when you don't want to just leave me there. And so this is an exercise I do a lot with patients, just to help them see that their mind is talking to them all the time, and how seriously they take it is really what matters, not so much what shows up.
Marisa, anything to add to that, or something that you may do in your own practice?
I mean, I think that was a great demonstration, Nate. And I think that the only thing that came up for me is around just the question of like, is focusing on this thought, like is continuing to spiral and focus on that thought, is that going to help? Like, is that going to bring me where I want to go? And if it does, great. Let's buy it. Let's believe it. Let's focus on it. Right. But if it's a thought that I know is going to be associated with me feeling unmotivated or perhaps take me further away from what's really important to me, then that's a thought that I may want to practice doing some of these diffusion skills with.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So I'm going to, sorry. I love that exercise too. I think it's really important. And one of the other important things is that OCD can be really tricky, and OCD can turn anything into a ritual, including doing diffusion. And that's really important to know, because the purpose of that is for you to do exactly what Nate said, which is observe thought, and Marisa too, like just observe your thoughts. And you don't have to do a thing with them. You can have them. You don't have to like them. You might not like them. You might think that they're really awful. And they don't mean anything about you. They're just noise. And so you can choose the ones that are useful and do what they think you should do and leave the rest, right? But sometimes when you're doing ERP, people can go, okay, I'm going to diffuse from my thoughts, so it's not that hard. No. That's not what you want to do. So there are some tricky little pieces here. So it is important to kind of like understand that ACT, again, is about learning to do things that are important to you, that you care about, that you choose for you, right? Being curious about the outcomes, and while not necessarily liking or feeling comfortable with whatever thoughts you're having, they can come along for the ride. Does that make sense?
Totally. Nate used to tell me that it was a parrot on my shoulder, like a pirate. I walked around with the pirate every once in a while. It goes, "If you," and I'm like, and then you just ignore it again. With that, I have so many stories I want to tell, but I'm not going to make it about me. So let's dive into questions. Actually, Lisa, I'm going to continue on this topic. Kenny Phelps at 7:07 p.m. asks, how do you typically use diffusion with OCD? I found that noticing and naming parts to be helpful, but that neutralizing (parentheses), changing to a character voice, singing, thought, etc., can lead to compulsions. Thoughts?
Kenny, you're right on. And what you're doing, so what I would say to you is, it's about the function, right? And what I mean by that is, how is what you're doing working? Okay. If you, and we encourage people when they are in the middle, like, so when we teach ERP, right, at the junior, right, which is the sort of kid version of where Nate is at McLean, we really do quite a lot of work on the front end, sort of like Marisa does, in what are the basic skills, what are the basic things that are important underneath exposure. One is to, instead of trying to suppress how you're feeling and avoid it and treat it like it's toxic and dangerous, to notice it, to get really curious about it, and to really kind of explore it, right? That's the first thing. Paying attention on purpose to that is another skill that's really, really important. And so noticing thoughts is part of that, right? Not necessarily to argue with them or neutralize them, but simply to allow them to be in your awareness. So the next thing that we do once we teach these basic kind of skills is notice what you're up to in this moment right now. Is what you're doing about trying not to feel or think something? Is it arguing with that thought? Is it refuting it? Is it trying to find a better thought? Or is what you're doing right now about something that matters to you, about something else? And if you could choose, what would you choose to do right this second? So it's teaching people how to disengage from that mental chatter. And the function then is different. It's not to make a thought go away. It's to move towards something that you care about.
Marisa, something to add on that?
No, I mean, I think, Lisa, you said it really well. I think the only thing that came up for me was around just the question of just noticing, like, when you are having that thought and you're practicing diffusion, does it actually help you connect with the feelings and your experience right now, or is it taking you further away? Right. Mm-hmm. So just noticing what helps you connect to your experiences and what takes you further away. And so sometimes I'll teach a diffusion exercise, and it's really, I really encourage the client to notice for themselves, right? Is this helping in terms of practicing having the feelings and the thoughts, or is this actually taking you further away? And for some people, it actually opens them up to having the experience. And for others, it takes them further away. But that noticing is hard for a therapist to be able to really identify unless they check in with the person. Like, it's really the person who knows.
Right.
That.
I love that.
I totally agree.
Yeah, 100%. No, I remember. I'm getting kind of emotional for some reason. I don't know why. I think maybe it's just Nate, but I don't cry often on these. But I don't know. A lot of memories are coming back, and I mean, it's just like, you guys, if you're struggling, if you're in a dark place, like, I swear to God, you can get better. You just
really can.
I wanted to become an advocate because I wanted to show people that no matter how sick you were, you can get better too, and it's just a fact. And I know it's difficult. I know it's hard. I know there's lots of barriers to treatment, and that's what we all work tirelessly to fight against. But like, don't lose hope. There's always help. There's always hope. We're here for you, and we love you. Actually, I was thinking about something that Nate said after you mentioned the word chatter, Lisa, and it reminded me of this conversation. this conversation Nate had with me. This was years later. We catch up every now and again. He's like, what's going on? I'm like, I should exercise more. And he goes, well, how come you're not? I'm like, well, I'm sitting at home and like, I go, I really need to go outside and exercise. I need to really get in shape and get healthy. And then I was like, but then the other part of my brain goes, yes, but you have to work and you got these things to do and you have to finish these things. And I said, so I just go back and forth. And he's like, well, can you let both of those sides of your brain argue? And then while they're arguing, you just go out and go exercise. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I mean, yeah, I guess that's
awesome.
And it was just kind of like mind blowing because it's the chatter. It's just like letting the chatter happen and moving your body in a direction that's important to you anyway. I mean, it's super hard. It's not easy at all, but it's so fascinating. So Marisa, I'm going to unless Nate, did you have anything to add on this particular question?
Let's go on. I'll come back to it.
Okay. So Marisa, I'm going to throw this to you. 7:12 p.m. Jess. Nope. Just kidding. 7:10 p.m. Natalie Sanborn asks, would ACT help with OCD without using ERP? If so, how? Thanks for any information.
Would ACT help without using ERP? I mean, this is hard for me to ask because I feel like so many people view ACT and ERP as separate, and I don't really see them as being separate. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, was because I was having trouble finding resources that actually pulled them together rather than separated. Yeah. So as Lisa said earlier, like ACT is an exposure-based therapy. The way I see it is acceptance is like the overarching umbrella, and there's more than one way to practice acceptance. I think the beautiful thing about ERP is that it provides a bit of structure for people through the process. And so I guess if you just went to a traditional ACT therapist, and actually Michael Twohig did the study, right, where he compared strict ACT groups to strictly ERP groups. And what they did find that the results were the same, like they were the same. So I do feel like it would be as effective, but ACT would include that exposure component to it.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Lisa. Nate. Yeah.
Nate, you want to go?
Just to echo that, I think that what's happening in the OCD field right now is the best OCD therapists really look more like ACT therapists, meaning they're tracking things like how open people are to their emotions, how much they're seeing their thoughts as thoughts, they're bringing the values work in. Lots of people are adding ACT into their workbooks now, the original OCD workbooks. So I think these things are really the same. And what ACT does is really helps people engage in exposure in a way that's, I think, more effective, although we can talk about that. I think it really helps people who've struggled like you did, Ethan, with exposure, get on board with it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a more precise way of teaching exposure, right? Because it really breaks it down into its component parts. And I, in my opinion, if people are, so I don't know how nerdy to get here, but I'm going to nerd out just for a second. If you think about the newer ways we think about how exposure works, like inhibitory learning, that we don't unlearn anything, but we do create new learning all the time. And the name of the game is how do we support the development of that new learning that competes with sort of the fear learning that we've had. And if you think about breaking exposure down into, you're not just approaching a scary situation. It's about the how you do it. Like, do you remember Harry Potter when the kids were all learning to do spells? Like, you could kind of ridiculous. But if it didn't, if your heart wasn't in it, it wouldn't work. ERP is kind of like that, in the sense that you have to allow yourself to have the experience while you're doing it. And ACT gives us such great language about that. And it also helps us create, right? Co-create with clients, or whoever's struggling, like, what's the thing? Like, who do you want to be? Like, what are we in this for? It's not just about, I want to be more flexible or be less anxious. It's certainly not about that, but it's about how do I really be the best person I can, how do I be my best self, and I love that part about it. And what I see is when we see like Ethan, like you, like when we see kids who have really hit rock bottom and they're really struggling, sometimes I will shift directly into ACT and just do that and just do some values work. And it inevitably brings them into the presence of things that scare them or that are uncomfortable. And then they have a choice to make, right? And that's how it occurs in this really contextualized way. That being said, I do exposure menus and things like that too, because it's like anything. Like if you're going to learn to run a marathon, you got to practice, right? You got to get stronger. You got to practice in different environments, different people, different moods, all of that stuff. So I like I typically use, and again, I'm with Marisa on this. They're the same. There's just different ways to do each, but it's so wrapped up all together for me at this point. That's how we teach it. That's how we use it.
For sure. And I also want to add, just as an individual with OCD, I think there's a couple of pitfalls to look for. One, we want every tool at our disposal. It doesn't have to or need to be one or the other. They're both effective, and yes, there are elements of each that are the same, but why not put as many tools in your tool belt as possible? The other thing that's important is to be really honest and clear with yourself about because for me, if ERP wasn't working, I'm like, what's this news thing? Is it easier? Will it work quicker? Like, you don't want to move to ACT maybe because you're struggling with ERP is difficult, right? You really want to gut check with yourself and ask yourself, are you giving yourself fully to whatever modality of treatment that you're doing? Because ACT is not, we don't want to look at ACT as an alternative because ERP is tough or hard. And that's something that's really important. Really, this is all grouped together. We want to really do a gut check with ourselves. As Lisa said, ACT or ERP, you got to be in the moment and give the spell you got to give the spell your heart, or it's not going to work. So just a couple things to add. We have some great questions. So at 7:17 p.m., Nancy Foster asks, I'll throw this out to Nate. How do you figure out the life you want or your values when life has gotten so small? Oh, no. That's okay. I'll go back up to next question. Go ahead, Nate.
That's a great question. I'm just going to start out by saying when I do exposure with people now, when I do OCD treatment, this is really what I focus on right at the beginning. And I think one of the things that ACT really adds in is a lot of times in exposure, we're telling people right away, here's the things you have to work on, here's the exposure hierarchy, here's what you have to do. And in ACT, I think you actually get to have it generated more by the person. So a quick example I'll give here is I was once working with someone who had really bad BDD, and she was afraid of like going out and having people see her face. So she would cover it with makeup before she would go out, and then she really only felt safe in that context. So we went out one day without her makeup on like a really hot summer day, and we were passing by people and she was looking away from people. She was hiding her face. And at one point I just stopped and said, what's going on here? Like, how do you want to do this exposure? And she said, honestly, I don't even like makeup. She said, I don't even really want to wear it. I bike all the time. I sweat all the time when I'm biking. Like, it's really inconvenient for me. Almost like, I just don't want to be doing this. And so I said, all right, well, the next person we pass, what do you want to do? And she said, I want to say hi to them. So we started doing exposures that were more generated by who she really is. And it kind of started with just a brief conversation about who she wanted to be in that moment. And then it built out into living her life in a different way in the world. We got all the way to the point where she had to go back to her college campus. And she was saying, everyone there knows me as this beautiful girl with makeup and flawless skin. And I said, what's important to you about this? And that's that gut check moment for her where she's trying to figure out, like, who do I want to be? And so I think a lot of what good exposure therapy, ACT therapy, whatever you want to call it, can be is just having conversations with people about what's important to you in moments when life is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that ties in, I'm actually, and Nancy, this will tie into your question. I accidentally skipped. Nick taught this question at 7:12 p.m. Jess, so back up just a few. I'm still struggling to identifying my values, how to pick values when my ruminations I think my ruminations feel so valuable. So this ties in a beautiful place. And I think, we can add on to what Nate said. Marisa, do you have thoughts on continuing to identify values and really seeing past the illusion that ruminations is what's going to keep us safe or feel better or all of those things?
I mean, I think the thing I just have to add is like I want to play the long-term game, right? Like, and so oftentimes, like, ruminations, compulsions are very focused on getting some kind of relief or neutralization in the short term, right? And so what is it we want? Like, if you were to sort of wake up tomorrow and, the OCD were no longer bothersome, what could your life look like? And it's not that tomorrow you're going to wake up and the OCD is not going to be there, but can we practice actually having it and building that life anyway? Like you said earlier, Nate, putting your feet in that direction. And I think asking yourself, like, what gives me purpose? What gives me meaning? And there are lots of like experiential exercises that we do and act to help people connect with that experience.
Lisa, anything to?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I keep muting because the dogs are barking in my house, so I apologize if you guys are hearing that.
Those are the intrusive thoughts.
I know, I'm like, the metaphor is just so funny. I'm like, I'm mute, not working. But, it's interesting because I do talk to not lots of people, but definitely sometimes people feel attached to a part of their OCD, right? And they feel, especially in perfectionism or other things. And I mean, that makes sense, of course, because if it's what you've been doing for so long and it's what it's really hard to think about, why would I do anything different? And could there be anything different, right? And so what I would encourage people to do is to notice that, because sometimes, rituals do work in the short term. No getting around that. And if you're a behaviorist, there's the saying, the rat is always right. And what that means is all behavior makes sense, right? In some way. But what I'd encourage people to notice is, what has the cost been in your life for engaging in all of, the rituals? What has it taken from you? What hasn't developed because your attention has been there? What would it be like if you didn't have to do those things? Just like Marisa asked, so noticing what's possible, but also noticing what has been the cost to you of this, right? And I remember, like, for me, when I wasn't giving talks and I was a young academic, I was a professor at Suffolk University, I didn't get to do anything that mattered to me. I didn't get to try and help people and make a difference, which is baked into the core of my being. And that made me really sad. So there was a really big hole in my life. And really acknowledging and noticing that hole and that emptiness and that sadness was one of the things that helped me turn towards doing things that were hard, on purpose. And so I would encourage you to think about those kinds of things too, and really notice, like, what is that cost of doing ruminations or any other kind of ritual? For sure. You can hear my barking automatic thoughts coming. Sorry about that.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again. One of the game-changing epiphanies for me in my OCD treatment was when therapists were saying to me, "You need to fight your OCD. You need to fight your OCD. You do this ERP." I didn't understand what "fight my OCD" meant. It was too nebulous. It was too ambiguous. It made no sense. What do you mean by "fight my OCD"? And then I got around this guy, and he was like, "Well, what's important to you and what are your values?" And we started identifying things, and it wasn't even about getting so specific. It was about, relationships, love, career, whatever it was. And suddenly acknowledging that your values and compulsions cannot exist simultaneously, that they are mutually exclusive events, right? Suddenly reframing this idea of, when I choose a compulsion, I'm not choosing a value. And so in making it really specific to myself, so when I have enough distance from my thought that I knew I was going to compulse, and I could either choose to compulse or choose to resist and sit with the discomfort, I could say, okay, well, I can either choose to meet the love of my life, or choose to not meet the love of my life. I'm choosing to be alone the rest of my life. And suddenly, when I started seeing compulsions as choices against my values, that's when I started to really be able to resist those choices. So that was a big game changer for me.
That's awesome.
Nancy Miller at 7:17 p.m. Many clients who are doing exposures feel high levels of anxiety and have trouble tolerating it. We'll assume she's a clinician. What ACT strategies do you use to help clients accept and tolerate anxiety during exposure exercises? Lisa, we're gonna make you sit with
I will.
discomfort.
I don't mind.
Nate, why don't you lead off?
Yeah, I'll just go quickly on this one. Something Mike Tuig said a while ago, he was on last week. He came to do a training at the OCDI like 10 years ago, and this just stuck with me for some reason. He had a fear of public speaking, I think, that he really struggled with. And he started to notice that what he needed to do, and I think this is what Lisa was saying, he needed to give talks in a way where he was tracking how much he was focused on what he really wanted to be about as opposed to the anxiety. And when you're not tracking your anxiety, it actually isn't as big of a problem. It's sort of like the dogs barking in the back where Lisa is. You know it's there, you can feel it. It really is a feeling in your body, but it doesn't have the same power. And so I remember Mike came to do this training, and he's sitting there and he looked a little bit anxious. And I remember being a little worried for him because he'd flown out from Utah to do this training for the OCDI. And he said, I'm feeling anxious now, but it actually isn't a problem for me. Like, it's just there. It's just this thing that I notice. And I could tell like he had figured out a new relationship with it, where it was just a thing in his body that he had while he was doing the stuff that was important to him. And I remember he said this funny thing. He said, if you ask me how anxious I am when I give talks, I couldn't really tell you because I'm not monitoring it. It's just a feeling.
I love that. Lisa.
That's like exactly my experience. After I the same thing, and with speaking too, and it was kind of funny because I remember I was at a conference in Italy, in Parma, and I'd given like 5 talks. It was it was my 15th wedding anniversary, and I was sitting at dinner with my husband, and I was talking about something, and I just was like, whoa. And he's like, what's the matter? And I said, I was like, I just realized that I've given all these talks, and it's not even that I wasn't anxious. It was that I didn't even notice whether I was or wasn't anxious because it didn't matter. And I was like, mind blown, right? So that's the power of ACT. So the one thing I want to back up, Nancy, because ACT isn't about teaching anyone how to cope with anxiety. Neither is exposure. It's not about how to tolerate it. It's about increasing your willingness to experience it and to notice that your mind might describe it as something that's dangerous and toxic and hard, right? And it is uncomfortable. And, what if it's something that you don't have to fight with? Mm-hmm. What if you don't need to what if there's no thought that's a wrong thought, right? What if that's not the enemy at all? What if that's capturing your attention? And so one of the things I notice is that people enter either just straight up ERP or ACT with the idea that they're just tracking anxiety. Am I more or less anxious? That's a really impoverished view of the world, of your experience, right? And you're not tracking, am I being effective? Am I building the life I love? Am I, really being with my friends when I'm hanging out with them? And so I would totally echo everything that Nate said so beautifully, that either exposure or ACT, it's more about increasing your willingness and your bandwidth to do this and learn how to feel it better, right? With more willingness and openness.
Thank you, Lisa. Maureen, I'm going to throw this at Marisa. Did you have something quickly to add at the end of that, Marisa?
Yeah, I was just going to say, one just little practical strategy to add in that I've found helpful for clients that are having trouble with being willing and open to these experiences is actually starting with things that they're the most motivated to do. What are you most willing to do? What are you most willing, in the service of you're going to feel anxious. It's going to feel uncomfortable, right? So you really need to like want to do it, right? So
or not want to, but like be willing to do it.
Exactly. Be willing to do it, right? So what are you most willing to like feel anxious about in the service of what matters to you? Like, what are you most willing to do?
Okay, role play. I hear in my voice it sounds like remix, but it wasn't. But that's how I heard it anyway. So Marisa, Marisa, you asked me that question. I'm in treatment with you, and I'm gonna say, yeah, but I don't feel like anything. I'm super hopeless, and I'm completely indifferent and don't care.
So that's an interesting thought to notice right there, like the yeah, but. Right. So I guess a part of what I'm wondering is, in terms of the yeah, but would you be willing to sort of hold that thought maybe in your lap right now? And would you still be willing to sort of move forward anyway in the service of being an actor or what really matters to you?
Well, I love that. It becomes a thought. It's just a thought. It's like but it seems so that idea of hopelessness and those thoughts of, because I've been there and I know so many have that idea of like, but I don't feel, and that also comes down to feelings. Well, I don't feel it anymore. I don't feel excited about anything. Therefore, I must not be excited about anything. Or I don't what I used to love or my values. I don't feel those things anymore. So those must be gone and not true. And it's, I guess, the importance we attach feelings to our thoughts and the importance we attach thoughts. I love that. Okay. I'm going to throw this also at you, Marisa. Maureen at 7:19 p.m. I'm assuming this is in the context of COVID. She said, how do you continue the exposures now if they are germ-related exposures? It seems confusing for my daughter.
Yeah, this is hard. I don't know, about, other folks here, but I know that for sure a lot of my clients have been struggling with this. Like, and so, I mean, stay within CDC guidelines, right? Like do the things that the CDC is recommending, but not more than that, right? So just kind of noticing, in terms of like, where do you feel triggered in your life? What is it? Is it about, for example, when I'm working with somebody who their germ contamination comes up around grocery shopping, well, we still need to all go grocery shopping, right? And we're going to go grocery shopping. And so when he goes grocery shopping, is he able to sort of wash in a good enough way, according to what the CDC is recommending, rather than going above and beyond, right? And so that's really sort of what we're focusing in on is, can I just kind of put a bit of energy towards reducing my risk without putting in too much energy to try and escape or avoid the uncertainty of what could happen.
Perfect. And actually, go ahead, Marisa.
I was going to say, I don't know if Lisa or anyone else has anything to add to that, but
I was just going to throw out that Maureen and Jess, if you have a second, Jess is busy behind the scenes, but some of our earlier live streams were specifically around all that stuff in COVID when we were first locked down and dealing with that. So if you go to the IOCDF Facebook page, which you may already be on, and look at some of the earlier videos from maybe the beginning of April, we talk all about that stuff and how to deal with those anxieties. Because the bottom line is OCD is never going to be content. 20 seconds, 40 seconds, minute of hand washing, OCD is going to always be like, well, was it enough? Was it too much? And so, but I would definitely check out some of those town halls because the whole things are dedicated to questions like that. But hopefully that gave you some sense. I got to get to some of these questions because other people are saying, answer these questions. And so I'm getting yelled at. Michelle Moreau at 7:20 p.m. I'll throw this to Lisa. Can you give us a specific example of treating an obsession with ERP versus ACT? Maybe fear of touching something because of contamination.
Sure. It would look very much the same. I would not talk so much about, and I would not emphasize noticing or the criterion for success being your anxiety decreases. What I would emphasize as success is, are you choosing to do something, in the service of something that matters to you? And are you willing, can you make a space for that anxiety, right? And noticing that, and noticing also, can you behave flexibly, even if you're feeling really constrained by the anxiety? So a couple of things that we do that, that I think are helpful, and seem to be helpful, to really help people be in the moment when they're doing exposures are we'll kind of have them, first of all, notice what it's like right before you do the exposure. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What's going on in your body? Notice your willingness. Okay, are we really willing to say yes to this? And check in with your why, the value. Why are we doing this hard thing, right? Because here's the thing. If it doesn't matter to you, why do it? If there's no cost to it, keep that. Who cares? I don't care. I mean, there's plenty of things that I don't do that I avoid, right? That don't matter. But there's lots of hard things that I want to do, that I'm willing to do, right? Because they matter to me. So I'll have people focus on that. The other thing that's really important too is being very curious about what will happen. And I saw somewhere in the feed there was a question about how would you think about inhibitory learning, right? And so I want people curious. I want people noticing what their mind is going to say that's going to happen, what their expectations are, and holding that really lightly, maybe in your lap, like Marisa just said, and being super curious about, let's find out, what's this like? You know, and I'll always ask, like, what did you learn from that? What surprised you? And so that's what I would encourage. So like, do it in the context of your values and really notice like what actually happens when you do this, and allow that experience and learn from it. Choose, right, to do something I always tell people too, it doesn't really matter how big the exposure is. I don't care. Do you care is the question. So if you choose, I'd rather you choose something you're super willing to do that's really a small exposure for you than something that you're like, oh, I got to do it, you know, and I'm really unwilling. So I'm going to kind of like, knuckle my way through it. Don't do that. That's just going to be spinning your wheels. Choose something really small and let that be your success. And then just do that. Keep doing that when it matters. And pretty soon you're going to find you've lived your way to a different kind of relationship with your OCD.
Marisa, do you have something to add?
I mean, I just say go slow, right? I mean, I get a lot of clients that have done it. Yeah, like I just want to do this. Like they pull up their sleeves and they're like, "Let's do this," right? And I, you know, on one hand, I love the enthusiasm, right? But on the other, what I start to notice is it becomes about doing the exposure rather than how they're doing the exposure. And so oftentimes, like I'm teaching mindfulness skills, like I'm teaching that noticing that Lisa was referring to. And we do that by really slowing down. I'm talking about like, whoa. If the exposure is stepping out of your door and going outside, I want to notice what's happening even before you step outside. Let's pause and just notice like what's actually showing up for you right now in this moment. And so it's very different than sort of pushing through an exposure. And what I find is slowing down, at least initially, to really allows us to notice what's there and be open to those experiences.
Awesome. Thank you, Marisa. 7:21 p.m. Renee Scott. Hey, Renee, I hope you're doing well. I'm glad you're here tonight. I'll throw this out to Nate. Can ACT help with rumination and mental compulsions? I find this is my biggest setback in recovery. I know we touched a little bit on this. Maybe can you dive in a little deeper?
Yeah, I think this is related to something we said earlier, which is in ACT, we're focused on not so much the content of thoughts in terms of how much they make sense or how logical they are, but we're more interested in how helpful they are for what we're trying to do. And so a lot of times I'll say to patients, you know, you're ruminating about this thing and it seems really important. Like if you figure this out, it's going to help you live your life better, or you're going to figure out, you know, who you should be in a relationship with, or like what school to go to, or whatever it is. But really what we're doing in ACT is trying to help people see what it actually does to their life to get caught up in those thoughts. And so doing a real test of like, when you go down that path, does your life get better or worse for you? And when people start saying, I think Marisa and Lisa echoed this earlier, when people start saying, no, but I really need to figure it out, I usually just come back to, yeah, no, I get that, but how is it actually working in your life to go down this path of trying to figure this thing out? And when people are really honest with themselves, they actually do start noticing that it's not helping them. It's not that problem solving is never helpful. It's just in moderation at the right time, use it. But when it's not helping, being able to notice that and pull out of it. And I think when people are able to get that distinction, they can start doing it on their own.
I love that. Lisa or Marisa, anything to add? Okay, moving on.
I agree with everything Nate said.
Yep, he all paid us to say that for sure. If I skipped your question, it's only because we answered it at some point, and I want to make sure to get to some new ones. Please don't yell at me in the email; it really stresses me out. So Lizzie Hine at 7:22 p.m. Is ACT or ERP more effective in treating a person with both severe depression and severe OCD? So I guess we're looking at a depression too, and OCD. I'll throw that out to any of you who feels comfortable taking that. Okay, I'll take it with my years of clinical experience. No, does anybody?
I mean, the thing I might throw out there is that ACT is they call it a transdiagnostic approach, right? And so because ACT actually targets the underlying mechanisms, it is considered an evidence-based therapy for depression as well. And so what I noticed is particularly the values work and the committed action work. So helping folks get in touch with their values, helping them sort of follow through on the things that are important to them, can be super helpful for depression as well.
I agree. And, when I think about depression, whether it's in the context of OCD or not, I think of behavioral activation as one of our strongest evidence-based treatments for that, right? And behavioral activation means setting yourself up for very specifically scheduled, pleasant, desirable things that you can do during your days, right? To help get you moving. And it's based on this, the idea of depression as, once you're not moving and you're not doing things, you're in what we might call a reinforcer thin environment. You're just not getting lots of good feedback from the world. And things feel yucky, it's hard to feel pleasure in things. So the ACT tweak on that would be engaging in valued activities, right? And noticing that even if you're feeling really down, because we can never always feel happy, right? It's just not going to happen. We're not built for that. We can still engage in things that matter to us.
Thank you. Perfect. All right, we'll go around the room on this one. Chad Brown at 7:26 p.m. Are there any good books on ACT that you would recommend? So Nate, we'll start with you.
So many. I wouldn't even know where to start. These two have already written some. Mm-hmm. I'll let you guys go first.
I want to say, wait, no, that's sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Marisa just wrote a very brilliant book on ACT and ERP for OCD, and it's just coming out, and you guys should look at it. It's awesome. There.
and then I'll plug. Go. And then if you have a teen, Lisa's book Stuff That's Loud is fantastic, and so and that just came out as well. Nate, where's your book, huh?
They beat me to it. I'm working on something else. I'll get there one day.
Nate's just got his shoulder to the wheel all the time. He's no time for that fluffy stuff.
Grinding.
He just works. Grinding. He does the actual work.
For sure.
But there's a few more books too. Lots of books by John Hirschfeld have a really beautiful ACT twist. Our colleague Patricia Zarita Ona has a beautiful ACT workbook for teens on OCD and many other books. Oh my goodness, there's Mike Tuhig's work, Steve Hayes' work. There's a lot out there. Who am I forgetting? I'm trying to hit everybody.
Russ Harris, maybe?
Yeah, Russ Harris, of course.
Trap, Russ Harris.
Right, those are not OCD specific. If you want an OCD specific book, these are the ones we're mentioning. But if you want general books, The Happiness Trap is a reasonable place to start. So there's lots. And a great place to find out more, if I could give a little plug for the association, if you're a therapist or if you are just curious about how ACT approaches work, the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science has a lovely website. They have many, many ACT resources that they can point you towards, talks and books and everything. So check us out there too. Perfect. Thank you. Nikki in Ireland, what's up? That's all I had to say. I love Nikki. We'll meet one day for sure. Okay. I'm usually ahead of the game here, but I'm slacking.
Simon Sabat at 7:35 p.m. Have there been any recent additions to the ACT regimen for OCD sufferers? At 7:35. Great question, Nate. Who's on the front lines here, guys? What's the newest? What came off the assembly line this afternoon?
You know, this is the first thing that's coming to my head, and so Steve Hayes, actually, he's the original developer of ACT. He wrote a book recently where he talked more about these things called yearnings, these sort of human desires to move in certain directions in your life. And one thing that I think we've already kind of touched on, but I think you're going to see it more in exposure as we go on, is people really getting in touch with the emotion that they're experiencing in exposure and then using that emotion to drive them to do the thing that they want to do. So it's almost like Steve Hayes calls it like a pivot, where the emotion's coming at you and then you redirect its attention towards the thing that's important to you. Kind of like an athlete in a game when they're feeling a ton of anxiety, they channel it into the sport that they're playing. And I think one of the things we can do more in exposure is get people in touch with all that anxiety that they're feeling and channel it in the right direction.
I love that.
I love that too. Lisa, Marisa, or I'm just going to say Marisa because it just cuts to the chase.
Sounds like a red wine, a Marisa.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think too, like, here's the thing that I often say to the kids or the adults that I work with is like, you know, sometimes the things that make you the most anxious or uncomfortable are the things that matter the most to you in a lot of ways, right? We don't get upset about like, you know, I have to go, I don't know, walk the dog or whatever. Maybe you do, but like, you get my point that like those things that are hard, those really difficult emotions can point to what you care about. And if we try to avoid it, suppress it, we're not using it in a way that's really useful to us, that can really open up a lot of things in our lives.
It's a great point. Actually, Simon, I'm just looking down at the questions and we're almost caught up. So go ahead, Marisa, please. Yes, of course.
I was just going to say, like, piggybacking off of what both of you are saying, like one question that I really love is, you know, when you're opening up to maybe hopelessness or sadness or anxieties, asking like, what might this be trying to remind me of that's actually quite important to me? That's right? Like, what might this sadness or hopelessness, fear be trying to remind me of that's actually really meaningful to me?
So, and I'll actually piggyback. I'll give credit to this piece of information. It's not mine, but Nate's colleague, we had Jason Croppinger on, who is on, and he said something that really blew my mind. But he's like, if you want to refine your values, follow your OCD breadcrumbs back to them, because OCD attacks the things that you value most. And I was like, when he said that, I was like, whoa, that's nuts. So like, to start with the OCD and there's a rope and just follow the rope all the way back to the value. And I was like, that's insane. Yeah, just piggybacking on what you just said, Marisa, which, of course, I taught Jason that. So anyway, we'll pick up on a second Simon Sabat question at 7:40 p.m. Just, does the inhibitory learning approach affect how ACT is applied in OCD treatment?
Well, just to say a little bit about that, I mean, you know, Michelle Krask had that lovely paper, and I think it was 2014, about specific things that you could do based on, you know, basic science on how we think maybe these processes are working across anxiety disorders and OCD. So helping folks notice what's different, right? Like, so mindfulness skills, as both Nate and Marisa have said, noticing what's actually happening instead of being stuck in your thoughts is super useful. And when you're doing values-based exposures, it's very organic, it's very contextual. So you're naturally going to be combining things, right? Combining cues and doing lots of deepened exposure and practicing in multiple different places and across multiple moods and times and with different people, right? And so I think it does actually quite naturally like integrate some of these principles into it. And again, it's just, you know, it's just a very contextualized approach, behaving in context.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to start reading some comments too, because I think if you guys have additional questions, please ask away, because we are burning through the. Stacy Hirschman actually wrote, They also gave me Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion. Kristen
So
Neff is
good.
fantastic. Yeah, for sure. I actually use her self-compassion workbook all the time. She also has a book version of her workbook, but definitely Google Kristen Neff as well. Jennifer left some great comments. She wrote, ERP can seem really scary, but really can work. I would also agree that my experience has definitely been that ACT and ERP really do merge so beautifully together. Also for me, also Jennifer, ACT and values work helped me to be present and to understand why it was worth it to engage in the difficult exposures in a way that can help me move toward my values, which is beautifully put and exactly the experience that I had as well. Let's see here. Okay. Is there a book? I think we answered Nancy's questions on that. Not that we talk. Sorry, I'm rambling because ACT saved my life. There are guys. Also, you guys have as always, incredible comments back to everybody else. So please read through the comment threads. Jess has done a killer job of linking to a lot of books, including Marisa's ACT workbook. And Lisa's book as well, Stuff That's Loud, ACT Workbook, OCD Mindfulness for OCD, searching for John Hirschfield. So not that we'll ever like to talk negative, but somebody asked about brain lock. Lisa, why do we not like brain lock necessarily for OCD?
Actually, I'm not sure. I know that book. I don't think that I've actually spent a lot of time reading it. Do you guys want to answer that one?
I remember controversy about this, but I don't know the details. What do you know?
If I remember correctly, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that the issue with it was that it only addressed the obsessions. It doesn't address the compulsions.
Oh, right. So with pure OCD.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So I think that was the big issue with it. Would have only addressed anything obsessional, but nothing. It wasn't a pure book, but it would only address obsessions and not compulsions. So I think that was the big kind of only addressing one half of the OCD equation. So it's not generally recommended for that reason.
Right.
But Nate told me to say that. I heard the author is a really angry person.
Is he listening?
Okay, this is interesting. So Nancy Miller, if you're what?
I was going to. Can I just backtrack for 1 second because somebody mentioned Kristen Neff's book and my compassion, and I don't know if a lot of folks have been exposed to the whole mindful self-compassion approach, but one of the things I found just with myself and also with the folks I work with, if you're particularly struggling with shame around the OCD or just shame in general, and a lot of self-critical thoughts, what I found that adding mindful self-compassion to your practice can be a really, really wonderful thing. And so if you haven't checked out any Neff or Gruner's books or the MSC model, I would highly recommend it. Yeah, I use it a lot in my practice.
And
I would just say, go ahead, Nate.
Just to echo that, one of the things we were saying before about like, if ERP isn't about fighting your OCD and it's not about like gritting it and bearing it, you need to have a way to talk to yourself when you're doing exposure that feels more compassionate. And I think that the self-compassion work really gives you a way to do that. And I think that's key for a lot of people who are struggling with shame and self-criticism.
Yeah,
I
agree.
I mean, and I'll echo all three of them. If you follow any of the podcast that I've done a couple years ago, I talked about a rough patch that I went through and really self-compassion saved my life. I always say for me, it's like learning Japanese backwards. It is not a native language. My inner critic is a nasty, nasty person. And if he were a real person, I would never be friends with him. However, for some reason, every time he pops up and says something to me, I'm like, you're right. You're absolutely right. I agree with you completely. And so really self-compassion was a total and complete game changer for me. I've been working Kristen Neff's workbook for a year and a half now with my own therapist. And so, and you'd be amazed at how mean we are to each ourselves. I mean, like
you're your own worst enemy, right?
It's quite remarkable how nasty we are to ourselves. So go ahead,
I find
Lisa. Or Lisa. No, I called her Marisa first. I'll get back to you, Lisa, in a second.
No, what I was going to say is it also ties in really nicely with ACT. Because if we're so caught up in judging ourselves and kind of focusing on the shame, it actually can get in the way of being open to our experiences. So for some folks that are particularly having trouble like doing exposures or engaging exposures because of the shame or self-criticism, I'll actually sort of pause the exposure work and actually practice some self-compassion. And what I notice is after kind of learning that language and learning to be a little bit kinder, and it allows them to then open up to some of these experiences. And sometimes they're a little bit more willing to then do the exposure work.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to say that I use it quite a lot with folks who are struggling with perfectionism, right? Because I know a lot of people who, me included, definitely Szymanski, who are perfectionists, right? And clients. Sometimes you get attached and feel like you need that critical voice in order to be okay, in order to make sure you're doing things properly, perfectly, or well. And really shifting into a more compassionate, kind coaching voice is so, so helpful and meaningful. So that's when I tend to use it as well. But I want to echo everything these guys say. It's really nice work.
And for all the questions about values, there's some amazing sections in Kristen's workbook. I'm going to call her Kristen. I haven't met her, but whatever. There's some great sections on Kristen about identifying your values and what they are and how you relate to them and how you undermine them. And so, like, there's some great sections on there on how to identify values. A few more questions. Kenny Phelps at 8:16 p.m. How would ACT help parents with family accommodation? That's a great question. Nate.
I got to give that to Lisa first.
So parents get you. I'm assuming that folks know how accommodation works, right? That like it's something that parents get pulled into because OCD really reshapes how families function, and it's something that it's hard for parents to experience their child in pain, and when kids are anxious, they're signaling to parents for please help me, please fix that, and it gets wrapped up in the sort of a value of, well, a good parent helps their child when they're anxious, right? And helps them not feel anxious. And that works a little bit, but it sustains the OCD and the anxiety and the avoidance behaviors. And what it does is it prevents kids from really going out and exploring their worlds and learning and mastering, the things that they want to master. And so one of my favorite things to do with parents too, actually, the self-compassion piece is huge, right? Because it is so hard for parents to come in and say, can you help me? When they feel like they should already know how to do all of this. And they're scared that you're going to tell them that they're doing it all wrong. So just tons of compassion for the parents out there who might be listening. But the second thing is I have them imagine, 10 years from now when your child is like 20. Uh-oh, are you back? Am I cut? No.
You're good.
When your child's older, what kind of a role do you want to have played? Like if you could imagine them giving a graduation speech at a high school, what would you want them to say about you and what your role is? And, typically those values are, I want them to be successful in the world. I want them to be loved. I want them to, build lives that they love. And so basically helping parents refocus on, well, what if our work was about that? And what if that meant allowing them to be anxious, allowing them to try things and fail, allowing them to struggle, and really empathizing with how hard this is and giving that kind of support, but not accommodating the OCD.
Love that. Let's keep plugging along. We have a few more questions. This is a great question. I've been asked. Nancy Foster asked, any ways to address hoarding specifically with ACT? Marisa, do you want to give that a shot?
Sure. I don't do a ton of hoarding. I have done some hoarding, and I do find it helpful, particularly with the folks that I've worked with. Again, like ACT targets really sort of these underlying mechanisms here, and so particularly with hoarding, there can be some kind of underlying grief, some kind of underlying sadness associated. And what ultimately drives that sort of saving behavior. And so what I've noticed is by sort of connecting folks to what matters to them. And so, oftentimes it could be about like being able to share their space with the people that they care about and the people they love. And so that may mean allowing some of these negative experiences to show up, whether it is grief and loss, in the service of being able to continue living the way that you want. So I have found ACT to be really helpful with hoarding, but again, I don't do a ton of hoarding, so I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah.
Just like it's in hoarding work, it's not just about throwing the things away and clearing up the house. It's like Marisa was saying, really getting in touch with what are the emotions that are coming up for you while you're doing that. And
Exactly.
all of the things that we talked about before apply to that process, where in ACT you'd really be assessing for how the person is relating to those moments when they're throwing things away and changing the relationship to those moments.
And if you have, if you are, you struggle with hoarding, if you go, I'll have Jess put this, but if you go to mutual-support.com, that's Lee Shore's website. Lee and Beck are amazing hoarding coaches and individuals with hoarding, and they're good friends of the IOCDF. And so you can get additional resources there, as well as resources at the IOCDF.org. Let's end on this question, because I think that this probably applies very well to a lot of people in this moment. The question is Rita at 8:20 p.m. How can ACT and ERP be used when compulsions are all focused on a fear of getting someone else sick? The value is great, care for others, but wrapped up in compulsions. This is obviously very tied into what's going on in current events today. So let's let everybody weigh in. Nate, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go from there.
I mean, I think you have to zoom out here and really look at what's important to you, like we've said. And, I have a lot of friends who've been sheltering in place in a way that seems like their life is really being put on hold. It seems almost too extreme. And I think for some people, they're actually starting to get depressed or kind of hopeless doing that. And so there's a way in which you can push yourself to go out and be with people, following the CDC guidelines in a way that's safe, but doing it in a way where you're saying, this is good for me to be out in the world, to be around people in a way that feels safe to me, but also pushing through some of the fear that you have and relating to it in a way where it's like the more I'm willing to feel some of this fear of getting people sick, the more I'm going to be able to connect with people. So I think some of that.
Marisa, go ahead.
I mean, I think the question that just came up for me is like, this tells me how deeply you care about the people around you, right? Like this tells me how big your heart is and how much you deeply care for the people that you love. But at what cost? And so that's sort of the question that comes up for me is like, and what's the cost of how it's being shown right now? Like, is there a way to care for, love, and connect with the people you care about while also still taking care of yourself and not having such a cost?
Go ahead, Lisa.
And so, I love this question a lot, Rita, because I think it brings up something that's really important, and that is you can do the same thing with completely different intentions. So you can engage in compulsions or you can do things for others because you're afraid and your OCD is dictating that you might get them sick. Or you can do that very same thing, but really notice like, what's my intention here? Mm-hmm. Am I doing this to make this, to quiet this OCD thought, or am I really doing this because I love and care for this person, right? And that will help you calibrate what, and reorganize sort of like, how do you do this thing and what should I do, right? And so it might help you do the things that Nate and Marisa are suggesting, right? To choose to move out into the world and acknowledge that we can never 100% of the time keep ourselves and others safe. We just can't. We will hurt others in our lives unwittingly, and sometimes on purpose if we lose our temper or for other reasons, right? But if what you're doing feels like it's about managing an uncertainty and a fear about, oh God, I might hurt someone, that's an OCD thing, right? So choose your intention and really notice, what do I want? How can I care, like in the way Marisa described, how can I care for this person in another way?
Thank you, Lisa. We are just about out of time. I want to thank our amazing guests, Nate, Marisa, and Lisa, for joining us and having a really fantastic discussion. So thank you to all three of you. I love you guys. So super quick, last minute thoughts. Go, Nate.
If you haven't tried ACT, I think you should. I think it's where the OCD field is moving. And I gotta say, I gave a talk at the OCD conference back in 2010 on ACT, and almost no one knew what it was. And now I think it's really kind of something the OCD community has embraced, and I'm really excited to see it. And I think it's for good reason.
Thanks, Nate. Marisa. Don't be so shy, Marisa. We'll go back to Marisa. She's feeling a little stuck right now. I'm sure she'll pop back. Oh, there you are. Hi, Marisa. I was killing time with bad jokes. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for having me, and I really value being a part of the IOCDF community and just connecting with you all in this work. It means so much to me that folks, that one, I've been able to find these resources in order to help myself, but two, that I'm able to sort of share it with folks that are suffering now, and doing stuff like this really kind of brings me to that value. So even though it's really anxiety provoking for me to be here, I also, connecting with you all in the community is really what matters to me. And what I would say is, this is hard. Like it's really hard to get caught up on our thoughts and our feelings. I know it personally. And I think just try to be kind to yourself through it, because I think that's where it starts.
Thank you, Marisa. Lisa, bring us home.
Yeah. So just a huge shout out to all of you guys on this. So fun to do this with you all. I'm always so in awe of all of the amazing work people are doing. And then just a huge shout out to the OCD community, folks with OCD, folks who are providers, folks who are researchers. This is I just don't know what it is about you guys, but this is one of the biggest hearted freaking communities out there. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of it and play a small role in helping. And you guys keep it up, keep up the good work. And if you're really stuck, listen to the things that Nate and Marisa and Ethan have told you. You can do this, and there's a way through. Hang in there. We care about you all.
We do. Thank you, Lisa. That was beautiful. They're already getting requests for a volume 3, so we will keep you updated. As always, and I just wanted to say thank you to Stephanie for her very kind comment. I don't want to. Wow, we have a scroll. That's really exciting. Thank you, Steph, for your very kind comment. I sincerely appreciate it. It really means a lot to me. So as always, I want to thank the IOCDF and of course Jess behind the scenes for doing her digital voodoo. This Saturday, our 2:00 town hall will actually be another teen panel, take 2. We had such a great turnout and such a great discussion. Our teens and our same panelists will be joining us again, including Lisa and all our friends. So if you have teens in the house, or you are families of teens or parents or whatever, bring your inner teen. Bring your inner teen, bring your teen spirit. We'll come up with more teen puns as we can. Please definitely stop by 2 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. So that is that. If you haven't already and you want to be notified about all the programming the IOCDF is having over the next month, definitely be sure to subscribe and follow on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Also, we have a brand new calendar on the IOCDF that will give you all the latest and greatest information on town halls, webinars, podcasts, live streams, anything and everything that we have going on. So you'll want to check out the calendar. Again, thank you to Nate, Marisa, and Lisa for joining us tonight. Thank you for taking time out of your work week or your week in general just to spend time with us. We really appreciate it. Always, I'll say it again, please go through the threads. Probably the best people that advocate for each other are you. You always leave great comments, and we really appreciate you. If you have questions, I think that was the scroll, and I wasn't even paying attention. But if you have questions or comments or we didn't get, please feel free to email us at info@iocdf.org. Yes, that was the scroll. I should pay attention next time. So excited about the scroll. That's the difference between seeing and listening and hearing. Anyway, you get where I'm going. So feel free to email us at info@iocdf.org. As always, stay vigilant, feel the feels. Don't let OCD off the hook during this time. There is always help and always hope, as our dear friend Liz McIngvale likes to say. We will see you next time. Good night.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Have a great night.